I'd like to welcome everyone this morning to the ASMFC summer meeting. This is the Summer Flounder, Scup, and Black Sea Bass Management Board. We are meeting concurrently today with the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council. I will get into what concurrent means versus joint shortly. Let me first go ahead and go through the board business of agenda, proceedings, and public comment. First order of business here is to approve the agenda as it was presented. Is there anyone that would like to present any changes to the agenda? Seeing no hands raised and hearing nothing, the agenda will stand approved by consent. Next order of business is to approve the proceedings from the February 2021 meeting. Is there anyone that would like to offer any changes regarding those proceedings as they appear in the meeting materials? Seeing no hands raised and not hearing anything else, those proceedings will stand approved. Our next order of business is to allow for any public comment on items that are not on today's agenda. Is there anyone from the public that would like to speak on a topic that is not on today's agenda but related to the species? I'm not seeing any hands raised and I'm not hearing anything. So we will move on to our next agenda item, which is to consider the ISSMP Policy Board Directive for changes to Addendum 33 on commercial black sea bass allocation. So let me first go through the sense of concurrent versus joint. There was in the very last 2 pages of the supplemental meeting materials for this meeting, a 2-page memo from Tony Kearns that outlined some changes that would be needed to the voting process for this meeting, which is the reason why we're calling it concurrent versus joint. The reason why we need to make some changes to the voting process is because of commission direction with regards to the species board needing to respond to the policy board's directive to take action on this matter. Typically, when we do the joint meetings, both the council and the board need to make like motions on a topic in order for either side's motion to be valid. But today we're going to need to allow for a board motion to stand on its own, which again is the reason for calling this concurrent versus joint. That process is outlined in greater detail again in the memo. I'll try to just briefly summarize it. What we will be doing today is we will shortly turn to staff for a presentation about the background and the appeal. We will then take questions on the presentation as it was provided. I will then turn to a board for a motion, and specifically I will be turning to the state of New York for the opportunity to make the first motion on this topic. When motions are brought forward, the board will have the opportunity to make the first motion on a particular area. We will then turn to the council for the opportunity to make a like motion on that or not. Whether or not the council chooses to make a like motion, we'll be able to follow a board motion through to completion. That would include the ability to follow Robert's rules and go 3 levels deep on a motion up to 2 amendment substitutes to a main motion. And again, at each stop along the way, giving the council the ability to make a like motion. It is my sense right now that there are probably 3 possible outcomes from today. I say that as a chair that recognizes that they have a plan until the motions start flying, so we'll see how things go. I think the first outcome is that the board takes corrective action within the bounds of the policy board's directive. The council takes a like action. Another possible outcome is that the board takes the required corrective action, but the council does not take like action. In the event that that occurs, that puts us in this situation. I think that the service will likely have a difficult time. I don't intend to speak for them, but from past experience, given the fact that we would then have divergent state waters and federal waters commercial black sea bass allocations and quotas, that would probably put the service in a very difficult position to approve the council's amendment as it was previously decided on. The other possible scenario today is that the board does not take the required corrective action, in which case the policy board would likely need to step in and then make a decision about how to proceed moving forward at that point. So that kind of lays out what the plan is for today, what the possible outcomes would likely look like. I will first turn to Mike Luisi to see if he'd like to add anything as chair of the council with regards to the process and plan for today. And then before we get started with the staff presentation, I'll just entertain any questions from the board and council with regards to what our plans are. Mike, you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, thanks, Adam. No, I appreciate your as expected. You were very thorough in your explanation about the process. There have been some discussions going back and forth over email regarding the council's. So John Almeida, who's our council attorney, had some thoughts about process and how we reconsider the motions that were made and passed. I wonder if John, if he's on the call, if he might want to speak to what may have to happen as far as process goes. But Adam, no, you did a great job outlining everything. You and I have spoken many times over the past week, and you know, I'm looking forward to the discussion today. But I don't want to put John on the spot. I'm not even sure he's on the call. I'm looking for his name right now. But if John's there, maybe he can speak to what he thinks is the correct process for us regarding rescinding the previous motion made by the council.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, my thought was similar to at the June meeting when the council voted to rescind the motion that sent the amendment to NIMFS, that there would be a similar motion to rescind prior to a vote on whether to take corrective action today based on, you know, changes to the allocation formulas, so that prior to a vote on, I guess prior to a motion on what a corrective action would be, that there would be a motion to rescind the earlier, the main motion from the February meeting. Because right now that's still on, you know, as to this amendment, that's still on the books. So we might want to vote to rescind that in order to clear the decks for consideration of something different than was adopted at the February meeting. And I understand that the commission doesn't view that as necessary given what the policy board did. Basically, the policy board rescinded the February vote of the board. So the commission doesn't view that as procedurally necessary at this point.
Yeah, so John, though, I mean, so not to I mean, today's going to be complicated enough. If the council and the board end up agreeing on terms based on the remand by the policy board, is that enough to make the corrective action? do we need to go through the process of the rescind? Because the council, they could rescind what happened, you know, during a previous meeting, but they may also, the council may also choose not to change what their decision was. So I just, you know, today's going to be complicated enough. I just don't know that how necessary it is to go through those hoops. But you're our attorney, so you know I'm looking for you for advice. And Adam, you know, I don't know how that would work within our scheduled plan on how this is all going to unfold. So I didn't mean to complicate things, but there have been some emails going around the last day and a half or so. I just read them this morning. So yeah, John, I'm just looking for advice as to what we should do first, second, third, fourth, and fifth as we go through this process.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and I appreciate that, Mike. This is kind of an unusual circumstance that we're in here. I think to the extent that the council doesn't do anything, then, or the council chooses not to change what its earlier vote, then there wouldn't need to be a motion to rescind. I think it's only if the council is entertaining the possibility of changing what it did earlier, that there ought to be a motion to rescind. Does that help?
So I want to thank Mike for going ahead and Mike, thanks for highlighting the fact that we've been working together on this. I didn't mean that initial part to sound like all of this was Adam Nowalski's idea. No, we've been working very closely with staff, with leadership, both the council and the commission. So this has been very much a collaborative effort. So I think the question then I have for you, John, is can the council make motions without having a motion to rescind first? And then if we get to a point, you know, could the council motions look like in the event that the council rescinds, then we would propose this change? Could a motion look like that? Another possibility would be, could we start out with a motion to rescind and then table that motion until all other actions were done and then come back to that motion to rescind as a way to wrap up? Or from your perspective, do we have to have a motion to rescind and pass in order for the council to make any motions on changes to the allocations this morning?
I think your idea of tabling a motion to rescind until the time when it would be needed might be the best approach.
All right, so let's go ahead and I think what we will do with that is, again, we'll do a staff presentation first, and then we'll entertain motions. Let me just turn to staff. We had sent out the voting policy detailing that the board would make all first motions. Would staff prefer that the board, should the board, which I fully expect, make a motion to change New York's allocation, would we then need to look to the council to first make that motion to rescind and table, or would you allow for the council to make a motion to rescind first? I'm thinking we'd want the board motion on the table, and then the first thing that the council would do after that would be a motion to rescind, followed by a tabling of that motion, followed by a like council motion is what I'm leaning towards after hearing the guidance from general counsel.
That sounds like a good plan to me, Adam. Thanks for outlining that. But I think that's
all right.
The right steps. And I'm going to go back on mute, and we'll get into the staff presentation. But yeah, I think sorry for the hiccup on that one. It just came to us last minute. So, but I think you have a good plan.
Okay. So let me, before we turn to staff, are there any other questions from the council or board regarding the process of how we intend to proceed today? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands raised or hearing anything. So I will just, we got one, Joe Semino. Go ahead. I had my hands order here reversed. Go ahead, Joe.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I guess this is as under my council hat question, and I apologize, but I'm sure I'm not the only one that's confused. So we did have how is this different than the June vote as a motion to rescind? Was that just because it was the submittal to NIMS? And so it's, as John said, still on the table. Is that correct? That's how this is different from what we did in June?
I'll turn to John Almeida to try to answer that. Or Mike Petney, I see you got your hand up. I'll turn to somebody from the service to go ahead and answer it.
All right, hi everybody. I can try to take this, but John can correct me if I get something wrong. So yeah, so as everybody knows, through the council process, there's a series of motions that select the preferred alternatives, and then once we work through all of those, there's a motion to submit the amendment as adopted by the council. So the way I look at this is the motion in June rescinded that final motion, the motion to adopt the amendment and submit it to us for review. That allowed us to pause the review process on the amendment and provided the opportunity for the council to engage with the board today. But yeah, to John Almeida's point, all the motions that the council adopted in terms of the preferred alternatives within the amendment are still on the books. And so that's why I think, John is looking, or John was suggesting, and I agree, that a motion to rescind the council's preferred alternative would then clear the decks to entertain a new motion to select a different preferred alternative.
Great, thanks for that, Mike. John, do you have anything to add to that, or might get us in the right direction?
No, Mike summed that up pretty well. Thank you.
All right, great. So, Joe, the June motion rescinded the final action, and then what we would need to do today is to actually rescind the preferred alternatives. That cleared up for you, Joe?
Crystal, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Mike Petney, still got your hand up. I'm guessing that probably just left up. Yep, that's down now. Thank you very much. Any other questions from the board or council before we go ahead and turn to staff? Okay, seeing none, I will also just add that it is my intention to entertain public comment on what we do today. It will be my intention to entertain public comment when we get to a main motion. Before we take a final vote on a main motion, we would go ahead and take public comment. All right, so let me go ahead and turn to staff. Thanks for that. Clarification and clearing some stuff up and how we're going to proceed. And we'll go ahead and get going with the staff presentation.
Thank you, Adam. Today I'm going to go over what has led us to the directive from the ISFMP Policy Board to the Summer Flounder, Scup, and Black Sea Bass Board for changes to Section 3.11 of Addendum 33. Next slide, please. Addendum 33 was approved in February of 2021 by both the board and the council. Under this addendum, the allocations that were changed included Connecticut's baseline allocation increasing from 1% to 3% of the coastwide quota to address its disproportionately low allocation compared to the increased availability of black sea bass in Long Island Sound. The allocation for all states would then be calculated by using 75% of the coastwide quota according to these new baselines, and 25% to the regions based on the most recent regional biomass distribution information from the stock assessment. The three regions that are in Involved in the allocation distribution are Maine to New York, New Jersey as a standalone, and Delaware to North Carolina. The regional allocations are distributed amongst the states within the region in proportion to their baseline allocations, except for Maine and New Hampshire. And this is because the allocations would be based in part on the regional biomass distribution from the stock assessment, and they would be adjusted if a new assessment indicates a change in the regional biomass distribution. In March of 2021, the state of New York appealed the allocation changes approved by the board. The appeal argued that New York's baseline quota should increase similarly to that of Connecticut, as it too had experienced a significant disparity between allocation and the abundance/availability of the black sea bass in Long Island Sound, which is a shared water body of state waters for both New York and Connecticut. The policy board considered this appeal in May of 21 and found that it was justified. The next few slides cover the rationale of why the board found the appeal justified. Adult sea bass, next slide, sorry Maya, the slide titled Long Island Sound. Adult black sea bass were rare in Long Island Sound in the base years when the original allocations were set by Amendment 13. Long Island Sound did not support fisheries in either state when the original commercial allocations were made. New York's 7% allocation was based upon black sea bass landings in its traditional ocean-based fisheries that operated in other state waters as well as in federal waters. Next slide, please. Long Island Sound is a shared water body of both Connecticut and New York. We saw a large increase of black sea bass in Long Island Sound starting in the late 2010 and onward, as you can see from the trawl survey index on the screen. There is a dramatic expansion into Long Island Sound during these years. Next slide, Maya. The commercial black sea bass landings in Long Island Sound have increased substantially and now make up 50% of both Connecticut and New York's total annual commercial black sea bass harvest. You can see here, New York's harvest is the blue line and Connecticut's harvest is the red line. You can see that increase since the mid-2000s. Next slide, please. New York's landings from Long Island Sound are much larger in magnitude than the landings from Connecticut. They're about 4 times greater. These substantial new landings from Long Island Sound strain the quota availability to New York's traditional ocean fisheries. Next slide, please. So this information that was provided to the policy board compelled the policy board to agree that New York's appeal was justified. The policy board then provided a directive back to the Summer Flounder, Scup, and Black Sea Bass Board. The policy board remanded section 3.1.1. This is the section of the document that only addresses the baseline allocations, back to the management board for corrective action to address the impacts to New York's baseline allocation in a manner that's comparable to the consideration that was given to Connecticut. The policy board also specified that the management board's corrective action would not result in a decrease in Connecticut's baseline allocation to less than 3% or decrease the percentage of quota allocated to the regional biomass distribution. The board's charge today is to determine how much of New York's baseline quota should be increased up to 2%. Next slide, please. This table here, which was included in materials that we distributed at the end of last week to both the board and council, or no, at the beginning of this week, I apologize, shows the current allocations under Addendum 33. These allocations have been updated with the operational stock assessment from this year. So they're going to look a little bit different than what you saw in the Addendum 33 as it was approved in February. Next slide, please. And this table is the maximum amount that could go to New York in its baseline, so 2%. As well, this table is updated with the most recent stock assessment. And Mr. Chairman, that is the end of my presentation. I can take questions. I do have other slides that show different percentages if you'd like to see them. I just figured for time, I would just start with these two.
Thank you very much for that presentation, Tony. So let me get a show of hands right now of people that would like to ask questions about what Tony presented with regards to the policy board decision and what we then have to do here today. Okay, I've only got one hand up. Dewey Hemmelwright, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was curious if there's any data that shows the gear type that's harvesting the quota or harvesting in the Long Island Sound, like a breakdown from hook and line, trap, trawl, or whatever that may be, about how the harvest has changed or taken place over the last few years, given that the landings have changed in Long Island Sound. Thank you.
Adam, I'd like to phone a friend and ask John Maniscalco to answer that question if it's okay with you.
No, if staff has a way to get an answer, I will certainly endorse that. Go right ahead.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
So Dewey, I wish I had an exact answer for you. Certainly, potting, trawl, and hook and line are all major players in Long Island Sound's black sea bass fishery, but I don't have a breakdown for you at this time.
All right, sorry, Dewey, we weren't able to get you the answer there with that one.
Well, no problem. I just, if you're looking at the changes that's taken place, I think it would also be a good idea just to show what gears are catching the fish. Thank you.
Thanks, Dewey. Next up, I've got Eric Reed.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is most likely a question for the state of New York, if you don't mind. The basis for the appeal, the successful appeal, was based on the biomass in Long Island Sound, exclusively Long Island Sound. And I'd like to note that Senator Schumer from New York, in his correspondence to the board, also mentions Long Island Sound exclusively. So my question is it the intent of New York to use any additional allocation to support a fishery exclusively in Long Island Sound?
Yeah, I'll turn to see if there's anyone from New York that would like to try to answer that question.
It's Jim Gilmore. Eric, I think that the simplest answer to that is that, again, based upon the graph, we essentially, the Long Island Sound fishery overwhelmed the ocean fishery, and we really wouldn't have a way to segregate the two water bodies based upon the way the fishery is managed. So this would just be an increase for the overall quota for New York, not segregated by water body, just simply because we can't manage it that way.
Well, that's I appreciate your answer, Mr. Gilmore, but it is interesting to me that we have Tautog that is managed in Long Island Sound between New York and Connecticut as well. So thank you for your answer.
Thanks for your question, Eric. Do I have any other board or council questions? Any questions here? If the public has a question on this, if they can try to work with a state board or council member, I'd really like to try to keep questions here at the board and council level if possible. All right, I'm not seeing any other hands. So with that, and having had the presentation, I think we're ready to turn to look for getting a motion on the board here to start the debate and conversation here today. Emerson, you've got your hand up?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a motion, and I think staff has a copy of that motion. So I move to increase New York's baseline allocation in a manner comparable to the consideration given Connecticut for the expansion of black sea bass into Long Island Sound. New York's baseline allocation for black sea bass will be increased by 2%. This action maintains Connecticut's baseline allocation is 3% and maintains the percentage of quota redistributed according to regional biomass. The remaining states' baseline quotas will be adjusted consistent with the allocation tables provided during this meeting.
Okay, thank you, Emerson. And to clarify, that motion is on behalf of the board. Do we have a second for the motion? I've got a hand first came up from Jay McNamee. Jay, you are seconding the motion?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
All right, so at this point, we have a motion made by Mr. Hasbrook and seconded by Dr. McNamee. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn to New York for the opportunity to provide some rationale for their motion beyond what we saw. And then after that rationale is presented, we will turn to the council to see if anyone from the council would like to make a motion to rescind the preferred alternative from the previous motion and go down the road that we talked about earlier to see if we get to a like motion. So I'll turn to New York here at this point. Emerson, would you like to go ahead and provide additional rationale?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
I think Tony covered the background and justification pretty well in her presentation. However, I do have some additional comments and information. We developed Addendum 33 to address the issue of the increase in black sea bass biomass in the northern region. The problem statement of Addendum 33 addresses this issue and specifically highlights the fact that expansion of the black sea bass stock into areas with historically minimal fishing effort has created significant disparities between state allocations and the current abundance and resource availability. The increase that New York received due to the regional reallocation of Addendum 33 is based on the fishery that existed during the baseline period and accounts for increased biomass in the ocean fishery. It does not address a significant increase in biomass in Long Island Sound, an area with historically minimal fishing effort. The board addressed this issue for Connecticut by increasing its baseline allocation by 2%. However, no such consideration was afforded to New York for the significant biomass and the related fishery in Long Island Sound. And then, Mr. Chair, with your permission, I would like to hand it over to John Maniscalco of New York DEC to provide some additional technical information.
Yeah, we'll look to John to try to keep it as concise as he can. Go ahead, John.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'll provide a little bit more information, including some that addresses Eric Reed's question. But I will also remind the board that tautog is not a quota managed species in New York State, so those dynamics are a little different. I was wondering if Maya had any slides that New York had submitted earlier that she could put on the presentation.
Maya, those are those backup slides I sent yesterday.
Thank you, Maya. So as Tony noted, commercial black sea bass harvest from Long Island Sound has increased substantially in both Connecticut and New York, and now makes up approximately 50% of each of those states' total annual commercial black sea bass harvest. Next slide, please, Maya. And as you can see here, New York State landings from Long Island Sound are actually much larger in magnitude than the landings from Connecticut, approximately 4 times that in recent years. And given this level of New York State landings that are now coming from Long Island Sound, a 2% baseline allocation increase matching what was received by Connecticut is certainly justified. A New York State licensed commercial food fisherman can take and land black sea bass from any of our state waters. These substantial new landings that are coming from Long Island Sound strain the quota available to all of New York State's fishermen, including the traditional ocean-based fishery and those now fishing in Long Island Sound. In fact, under a 50-pound daily limit, New York was closed for 4 to 6 weeks straight in mid to late spring to early summer of pre-COVID years like 2018 and 2019. And while all New York State fishermen are impacted by these low limits and closures, closures in late spring especially impact Long Island Sound fishermen because the fish arrive later in the season there. New York is seeking an increase to its baseline allocation to account for the expansion of black sea bass into Long Island Sound. Our initial commercial fishery management goals are to maintain our limited winter fishery. In 2021, that's 500 pounds weekly, and then enable fishermen to fish during the warmer months when inshore access is high without closures at something approximating 70 pounds per day. A baseline quota increase sets the stage for relief for all fishery participants that have been impacted by the new Long Island Sound fishery, and also helps to ensure that Long Island Sound fishermen can fish when the resource is available to them. And while 60 to 70 pounds is a modest amount, it represents a single full carton commonly used in New York State's consignment-based fisheries. So that amount will maximize a fisherman's profit per pound after accounting for packing and shipping costs. The nearshore nature of the black sea bass resource and fishery around New York requires quota management that allows for daily limits by a large number of participants. And by necessity, those daily limits have to be modest. Regardless of our quota, black sea bass will be encountered by a variety of fixed and mobile gear, fishing in Long Island Sound, other waters of the state, and in federal waters. And sufficient quota, which includes a baseline increase, will allow the state's fishermen to take advantage of the resource they now encounter almost everywhere in new and old areas and land those fish instead of discarding them. Next slide, please, Maya. So I will leave you all with this last slide to view, showing the differences between current Addendum 33 allocations and potential allocations that do include an increase in New York's baseline after current biomass distributions have occurred. And while I'm not minimizing the impacts to other states from these changes, the majority of these changes are less than 0.5%, which in recent proposed quotas equates to approximately 33,000 pounds. And I just want to thank you all for the opportunity to speak this morning. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, John. So I'm sure there's a number of people that want to speak and move us in directions. Before we get to a traditional pro and con debate on motions, now that we have a valid board motion, the board has had the opportunity to make that first motion. It's been made and seconded. I'd like to take a few minutes and turn to the council to see if the council is prepared to make a like motion. That like motion, as we discussed earlier, would need to be preceded by a motion to rescind the preferred alternative from the last council amendment action. And it would likely, rather than having a lengthy debate, because whether or not that is rescinded is going to essentially be the same debate as to the magnitude of the change, it would be my preference to have that debate during the motions that we would have regarding the percent change to New York potentially. So let me turn to the council at this point and see if a council member would like to make a motion to rescind and we might need to turn to staff to see what the scope of that is, if it's sufficient to say the preferred alternative, and then staff could wordsmith that a bit to make sure we're addressed accordingly, or maybe we've got a council member that's going to hit this one out of the park off first pitch. Tony Galernia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On behalf of the council, I would move that we rescind what was originally our preferred alternative. And your suggestion as to how the staff could wordsmith the rest of it, I'm very agreeable to. But my intent is to move to rescind so that we can engage in another discussion regarding how New York's allocation may change. Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you very much, Tony. So with regards to the draft motion that is on the board, I think what we have here was, according to the earlier discussion, our June motion had done the rescission of the submittal, and now we're looking to rescind the selection of the preferred alternative. I'll turn to John or Mike Petney again to provide some guidance before we get a second as to whether what's up is appropriate or whether they have some advice on how this should be wordsmithed before we get a second. John, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I might suggest a motion to rescind the main motion as adopted at the February 1st meeting.
All right, so Tony, John is suggesting a change to this, move to rescind the main motion.
I can accept that. I'm favorable to that. It captures the intent of what we're trying to do here. So I'm amenable to any editing that may achieve what we're trying to accomplish. Thank you.
John, would you suggest this as written is okay, or do you think we need to change this further?
I would suggest removing the from to submit to the end of the sentence.
All right, so we'll just put a period after meeting and remove the rest. All right, so thanks for your help and guidance with this. All right, so we'll turn back to Tony. Based on the guidance we've received here at this point, if you'd go ahead and reread this motion, and then I'll look for a second.
Okay, just as long as we understand that this motion is intended to address the Black Sea bass allocation. Move to rescind the main motion. Move to rescind the main motion as adopted at the February 1st, 2021 meeting.
Thank you, Tony. Do I have a second from the council for this motion? I have a second. I have Dan Farnham's hand up. Are you raising your hand to second the motion, Dan?
Yes, I am, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. All right. So again, keeping in line with our earlier conversation, that this is for the intent of just getting us to the point that the council would have the ability to like motions before we get into protracted debate here. Is there any interest in tabling this motion? Tony, you've still got your hand up. Tony's hand is down. All right, so we have this motion up at this point. Again, the council can choose to debate it or table it here as we discussed earlier. Chairman Luisi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you explain to me the reason for the consideration for tabling? I mean, maybe tabling isn't the right word. Maybe postponing until another decision is made would be easier, so we don't have to have a motion to take it off the table. But so the purpose then is to have a debate on the board's motion, and then if the council decides to move, can you explain to me the purpose of the postponement or the tabling? I'm
No,
not quite
I
clear on that.
I think you were going down the right road, Mr. Chairman, in that right now we have a motion from the board. We don't know if the council wants to make a like motion. In order to make a like motion, the council needs to basically back up. However, the council doesn't know if they're ultimately going to want to rescind things or not, is my expectation, until they know what that change is going to be. If we end up an hour from now and decide that there's no change to New York, then the council probably has no need to rescind things. Depending on what the magnitude of that change may or may not be, then the council would make that decision somewhere later this morning. So that's the purpose, to give time to go ahead and have the council make a like motion for the board, have that debate about how to change New York's base allocation, and then based on the outcome of those conversations and motions, the council would then make a final determination if they did want to ultimately rescind previous action and go ahead and change that. Does that help you?
Yeah, it does. I know it's just an added complication to the process.
So the alternative, I think, at this point is to have protracted debate about this, which I think is going to be difficult to do, not knowing what the magnitude of change is going to be. So again, I've got to go ahead and defer to the council for what they ultimately want to proceed. I'm here to facilitate that discussion, but based on our earlier conversation this morning, without forcing the council to do something prematurely, we got the sense that that was the purpose of tabling this at this point.
Okay. Yeah.
Mike Petney?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Maybe another way to look at this, and the way I guess I'm looking at it, is that, you know, voting down this motion by the council would establish that the council has no intention to change the main motion that was adopted in February, including the, you know, which is the allocations. Voting up this motion then allows the council to engage, as I see it, with the board on potential motions to change the allocations, but it doesn't obligate the council to adopt the same allocation that is currently on the table from of the board. But it basically frees the council members up to engage in that discussion and consider different allocations and vote on those different allocations should a council motion be made. But it seems like until we vote this motion up, there really can't be any other council motions that would follow the board discussion. So I guess I'm seeing this as the first step for the council to engage with the board on what the potential new allocations might be.
All right, so thanks, Mike. That's a little bit different than what I heard from John Almeida earlier, that he was comfortable with tabling this until later. But again, I'll defer to your thoughts on what to do with this. Based on that, is the legal interpretation, again, I'll have to turn to John Almeida. You know, earlier I thought I had heard that a tabling of this would allow the council to make other motions. The regional administrator seems to have a slightly different take right now on it. So I think I need some definitive direction from the council as to whether or not the council can make other motions to work with the board, whether or not we take action on this or tabling it. What does the council need to do with this motion? John, you got your hand up. Help us out.
Thanks, Adam. My understanding from the earlier discussion was we were going to get up to the point of a motion, but not necessarily have a motion be voted on, and then this would be tabled until such a motion was ready to be till it's ready to be voted on. So I think that was my understanding, was that we would keep this ahead of a vote on a motion. So we could have discussion, questions, get up to the point of someone putting a motion on the board, and then this would take priority over such a motion.
Okay, so what would you advocate for procedurally right now? Would you advocate for tabling or postponing this until another motion is made, or do you feel the council needs to vote this up or down now, with the expectation that should the council vote this up, that doesn't tie the council's hands to having to have to make a change to the main motion, that they could always fall back on the main motion from the February meeting?
I mean, I think it's cleaner if we vote the motion now, but I don't think you're precluded, as long as this motion falls, gets voted on before the later motion. Does that make sense?
Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and do this. Based on that guidance, let me see first a show of hands of people that would like to speak in favor of this motion. It would include both board and council. While this is a council-only motion, we are meeting concurrently. If we got to a place that we had a board-only motion without a light council motion, I would invite council members to speak, so I would give board members the same opportunity at this point. I will ask for a show of hands of people that want to speak in opposition to this motion, and let's work through this issue here then first. So first up, a show of hands of people that want to speak in favor of this motion. Chairman Luisi, you still have your hand up. Were you on that list, or was that still up from before?
I'm sorry,
Okay,
Adam, I had my hand up from before. I would speak in favor of this. While I have the mic, I might as well we'll say that, since the board has to take action, I think that council members need to be thinking about whether or not they want the allocations that we decided on back in February to be included in the federal FMP. The board is going to take action. There's going to be a change. And so if the council wants to keep those allocations in the federal FMP, then we're going to have that discussion with the board and come to some compromise as to changes that we make. Because as Mike Pentney mentioned, I think it was Mike that mentioned it earlier, or maybe it was you, Adam, it's going to be very difficult for the service if we have different allocations in both federal and state waters. And so by voting this down, we're essentially saying that the council is not interested in considering new allocations, which means that they'll likely not be part of the federal FMP. And by voting this up, it puts us in that partnership with the commission to try to find some solution. So I'll stop there, but thanks for recognizing me, Adam. It was a mistake, but I wanted to get that on the record anyway. So thanks.
No, look, again, please, with the concurrency of this, we need everyone's leadership and input here. So I've got one hand up for speaking in favor, Tony Delernia. And again, to be clear, this motion will not require that the council change things later on, but it gives them the opportunity to do so. Let me see any hands that intend to speak in opposition to this motion before I go to Tony Delernia in favor. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands of anyone to speak in opposition. So, Tony, before I even go to you, let me do the following. Let me ask the question to the council, is there any opposition to this motion? Seeing no hands and hearing anything, this motion will pass by consent. Okay, so if we can put this off to the side, let's bring back up the board motion. And the next place where we are is to make a determination if the council would like to make a like motion for what the board motion was. So I will again turn to the council. Is there anyone from the council that would like to make this motion for the council? Tony Delarney, I have your hand raised.
So moved, Mr. Chairman. You want me to read it
Okay.
in?
No, I think we've had it. I think it's already been read into the record, so we're good with that. Thank you. We just have it recorded that you have made the motion. Do we have a second by the council? Dan Farnham, your hand is up. Are you seconding the motion?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dan. Okay, so at this point, we have a valid motion from the board. We now have a valid motion from the council. So what I am going to do is I'm going to turn and ask for a show of hands that would like to speak in favor of these motions from both the board and the council. I would also then, after I do that, I will ask for a show of hands of people that want to speak against. And keep in mind that somewhere along that way, a board member would have the opportunity to make a substitute or amended motion if they want to do something with this. So let me first start with a show of hands of board and council members that want to speak in favor of the motion. I've got John McMurray. I've got Nicola Meserve. Roy Miller, I have your hand up. Was your hand up to speak in favor of this motion, or was it for another matter?
It was to ask a question about the meaning of the motion itself.
Okay, let me go ahead and finish getting a show of hands here of people to speak in favor, and then I'll come back to you. John McMurray, Nicola Meserve, Dan Farnham, Emerson Hasbrook. Okay, let me get, you could put your hands down. Let me get a show of hands of people that intend to speak in opposition to the motion, and then I'll go to Roy for his question. Chairman Luisi, your hand was up to speak in opposition, or did you have a point you wanted to raise?
No, I wanted to address, as I'll put my board hat on and my Maryland hat on, I wanted to address this in opposition. Thanks.
Okay. So in opposition, I've got Mike Luisi, Joe Cimino, and Shanna Madsen. All right, so we'll start with those lists. Roy, let me turn back to you for your question here about the motion, and then we'll get going with the pros and the cons here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Perhaps I'm the only one that needs this clarification, but I'll take a chance, expose my ignorance in any event. Is it the intention or is it the requirement, because of the action taken by the board, that the resulting allocation must be 2%, or if because of the reallocation due to biomass, if New York gets to 9% that way, do we have to approve a 2% increase? So it's unclear to me whether we have to go with a full 2%, or do we just get New York a total of 9% one way or the other, either through allocation or new baseline? Can someone answer that for me so I understand it?
Yeah, Roy, I'll take a shot at it, and staff can correct me if I'm misinterpreting the policy board directive. The policy board directive is to increase New York's baseline allocation by up to 2%. That's the directive from the policy board, by up to. This motion, as it exists right now, would increase New York's baseline allocation by the full 2%.
Okay, I think what I'm hearing, if I may, Mr. Chair,
Go right ahead.
up to 2%. In other words, we could make a selection for one of the lower percentages as long as the net result is New York getting 9% or more with both the allocation and the new baseline. Am I correct in that?
No, I don't believe the New York getting 9% is entering into this equation. All that's needed to meet the policy board remand to the species board is to increase New York's baseline allocation to something above 7%, but not to exceed 9%. So my interpretation of the policy board directive is that we need to be somewhere in the above 7% and not to exceed 9% for their baseline allocation when we end today. Whatever anything else in terms of regional biomass shifts, etc., wherever any of those other things ultimately leave New York, is a separate issue that I'm sure we'll discuss today, but ours specifically need to be part of this motion process.
All right, I think I understand now, Mr. Chair. So what you're saying is we make the baseline decision first and then worry about the reallocation.
The reallocation will then occur, and we don't actually have to, again, I'm sure we'll discuss it, but as a board, we don't have to worry about it in order to meet the charge from the policy board.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, I'm not seeing staff raise any hands, not hearing anybody tell me that I'm way off base here. So with that, we're going to start with our list. I will turn to John McMurray first for a pro. I'll then turn to Mike Luisi for a con. Go ahead, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chain. I don't think I need to talk about what's become a well-documented influx of black sea bass in Long Island Sound. I think we all understand that at this point. One of the stated intents of Addendum 23 was to address Addendum 23 was to address changes in the distribution of the stock specifically in Long Island Sound. Of course, it did that, but only for Connecticut, and clearly Long Island Sound is a shared waterway, and clearly New York received no such allocation. Now, I get that some of you see this from a coastal perspective and that we already have quota and we could just shift effort from our ocean fisheries to Long Island Sound, but it doesn't really work that way. Commercial black sea bass harvest from Long Island Sound has increased exponentially in the last several years. And if I understand correctly, it now makes up around 50% of the state's total annual commercial black sea bass harvest. And if I'm not mistaken, Long Island Sound landings are much larger than Connecticut's. These substantial new landings strained the quota available to the state's traditional ocean fisheries, and it has forced low trip limits and frequent closures across the board. So I would ask the board and the council to look at this issue objectively and fairly, not in the sense that we've got ours and who cares about New York, but think about what are mostly small-scale commercial fishermen in Long Island Sound. Those same people who lost lobster because of climate change are now seeing an influx of black sea bass, likely for the same reason. They can and should be allowed to access them in the same way Connecticut fishermen are. And think about the ocean fisheries that are also feeling some pain. Lastly, I understand some of you are prone to simply look at this as another allocation dispute, but it isn't. These fish moved into the Sound, debatably because of changing ocean conditions caused by climate change. In my view, it's 100% a climate change management issue. And if we can't deal with this sort of thing, which is relatively simple, we'll likely have minimal impact. Well, I think we failed, and we will likely continue to fail at truly addressing climate change as it relates to stock redistribution. We have the opportunity to show the world here that we can effectively address such shifts in stocks without being forced to do so with legislation. Let's take advantage of that. That's all. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, John. So next up on my speaking list, I had Mike Luisi.
Yeah,
Mr.
thank
Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to speak against the 2% increase. This isn't the first time that I've gone on the record to discuss this issue. It happened, when we made the final decisions back in February. But I feel as if, in protection, to protect the resource that we have in our southern region, specifically in Maryland, we found a really good compromise that I wasn't completely comfortable with, but we had our fishermen on board to be able to come to the agreement that we did as we concluded this amendment back earlier this year. The whole reason why Connecticut was considered for an increase to their baseline was because they were such an extreme, their quota was so extremely low at 1% that they weren't even able to have a viable fishery. And so all of the graphs that we're looking at today, indicate that New York's Long Island Sound fishery is much larger than Connecticut's. Well, of course it is. New York has a 7 or 8% allocation to the fishery, while Connecticut had a 1% allocation, and which is why I think it was a no-brainer to add to Connecticut's baseline allocation. We also in the southern region, and I'm sure that others on the call today will speak to this. We did address the problem statement in the amendment or in the addendum, and we have shifted an enormous amount of fish from a region where we've seen no difference in our abundance. So we shifted an enormous amount of fish to the southern New England area, and so New York has already received the additional fish that is going to help them solidify their Long Island Sound and their ocean fishery. So this to me is a request for it's a fish grab, honestly, and they're in a totally different situation with the allocation that their baseline starts at as compared to Connecticut, and I just don't see the comparison. I understand the policy board ultimately decided to remand this back to the board, and I can probably agree to some additional baseline allocation, but 2% is far beyond what I can support. And thank you for the time, Mr. Chairman. And I find it complicated sometimes as I speak as chair of the council, but I'm speaking now as a seat on the Atlantic States Commission's board as a Maryland stakeholder. So that's where I am right now. So thanks, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the time.
Thanks, Mike. I can empathize. Every time I open my closet, I'd like to get rid of some hats here, but like you, they're all still hanging there. So thank you. Next up, I have Nicola Meserve.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think most people around our virtual table may remember that I initially offered this proposed configuration of the options in the draft addendum that included the 2% increase for New York, and I continue to support that to address the expansion of the stock into Long Island Sound. And I say that as a state that stands to lose, a larger percentage of our quota than what's been decided already. I think that the 2% increase here is the most direct interpretation of the policy board's intent to take a corrective action here that's comparable to that given to Connecticut. In addition, I think the arguments that have been made by New York and in speaking with their staff about the percent of increase that's necessary to keep the fishery open at a low trip limit throughout the season and avoid unnecessary discards of a healthy species are very similar to the arguments that Connecticut made in order to get its 2% increase. I think Emerson Hasbrook made some really good points that the 25% that's being of the quota, or the quota that's being redistributed, really addresses the increase and the change in the ocean fishery, and that 2% or something very close to it for New York is the appropriate response for the expansion to Long Island Sound. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. Joe Semino.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I think as Michael Louise mentioned, I think this board got this right on the first go round. I want to correct the record. The addendum does not ask about addressing the distribution in Long Island Sound. The addendum talks about possibly reallocating based on the output from the stock assessment, which doesn't have that kind of resolution. The document mentions the word distribution 20 times. It mentions Long Island Sound once. And as Mike Louise pointed out, it's to point out that Connecticut was the most extreme example of a state that had trouble with the expansion of this stock. A lot is going on. To hear some northern states talk about this as a global warming issue, that might be true for range expansion. Although, looking at the most recent stock assessment, although the percentages of the northern to southern distribution did increase a little bit, there's been a downward trend in the SSB in the northern region since 2014. This isn't a species where the southern end of its range is North Carolina. This is a species that has the southern stock component south of Hatteras, and the southern portion of this stock from the assessment remains steady and is even increasing a little bit. I think we addressed the current distribution with the 75-20%, 25% split. We addressed the extreme example of Connecticut by adding some additional percentages to that baseline. We were handed a very, tight decision that really binds what we can do here by the policy board, quite frankly, in a fashion that reminds me of a movie called The Jerk, where Steve Martin is telling folks they won a prize and they can get anything between the ashtrays and the thimbles, anything in the 3-inch area that includes the chiclets but not the erasers. So we're in a chiclets but not the eraser situation, and when the time is appropriate, Mr. Chair, I would like to make a substitute motion on behalf of both the board and the council.
No, Joe, if you have a substitute motion on behalf of the board, I would entertain that at whatever time you're prepared to make that motion. Did you want to go ahead and do that now?
Yes, Mr. Chair, and I think the current motion reads quite well and gets to what the policy board has asked from us, and therefore I would simply change the increase from 2% to 1%.
So you're going to amend the motion by changing by 2% to by 1%.
Good catch. Yes, thank you.
All right. So to staff, that'll be a motion to amend. All right. And that motion will be on behalf of the board. And again, as per our procedures, we first need to get something up for the board. So based on that, let me go ahead and look to the board. Is there a board member that would like to second this motion? Okay, I have a hand raised by Chris Savage. Chris, are you seconding this motion?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Chris. All right, so we now have a motion. Again, this motion stands by the board, but what I will do next is I will turn to the council to see if the council would like to offer a like motion. So to the council, would someone like to make this motion on behalf of the council? Please raise your hand. Joe, your hand is up. You're making the motion, correct?
Correct.
Okay, Joe Cimino for the council. Is there a second from the council? Chris Batsavage has his hand up. Chris, are you seconding the motion for the council?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so we now have a motion to amend to change the 2% to 1%. I am going to continue with the list that I had. My assumption is that people that were speaking in favor of the original motion are probably now speaking in opposition to the amendment. I would entertain discussion on both of these motions as they are on the table. When I get through Dan Farnham, when I get through Shanna Madsen and Emerson Hasbrook, I will then go ahead and look for additional people to speak or amend or substitute along the way. As I mentioned earlier, we'll go ahead and allow this to go 3 levels deep. Jim Gilmore, did you have your hand up as a point of order, or do you want to get on a list when I go ahead and ask for additional speakers?
I wanted to be added to the list, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Stand by. We'll go ahead and get those hands up. I'll be sure to add you here. All right. So next up, I have Dan Farnham to speak. Go ahead, Dan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll make it short here. I think Mr. McMurray and Emerson have covered it rather well from the New York's point of view here. But I would like to touch upon one fact here that New York's allocation of 7% was based entirely upon its ocean-based fisheries. Now, through the last few years here, 50% of the landings in New York are coming from a distinctly different fishery that's emerged in Long Island Sound. And there's nothing that we can do about that. It's not like New York can just take that 50% in Long Island Sound and shut it down and give it to the ocean-based fishermen that the allocation was based upon. So here's the dilemma we have here is, so half the landings now are coming from Long Island Sound. In essence, the ocean fishermen who qualified New York for the 7% of quota are not getting an increase in black sea bass landings. They just are not. And what we're doing, we're seeing an increase in black sea bass interactions, but we're having an increase in discarding, like everybody is. But New York is seeing definitely a distinct increase, over, I think I would say, most other fisheries. I just would like to point that out, that the traditional fishermen are not seeing an increase in landings in black sea bass. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Next up, I have Shanna Madsen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm kind of coming at this from a different procedural perspective. In thinking through this issue, it was my understanding that all of the proposals to increase New York's baseline allocation needed to be within the range of options in the draft amendment. And so I've been spending a little bit more time in the draft amendment thinking through ways to accomplish this. So to start, in the draft amendment, it was proposed that New York receive an increase to their baseline allocation only if the trigger approach was selected. Specifically, this option was option E, and it stated that annually the coastwide quota up to and including 3 million pounds would be distributed based on the initial allocations, and then surplus quota above the 3 million pounds would be used to increase Connecticut's allocation to 5% of the overall quota, and then to increase New York's allocation up to 9% of the overall quota. So therefore, New York would only get a baseline increase from that surplus quota. None of the other states' baseline quotas were to be decreased as a result of New York's increase. So if the quota didn't reach the trigger, New York would not get a baseline increase. They would remain at 7%. So in my interpretation of that, the proposal before us today is something that was not distributed to the public, that New York would be specifically getting an increase in baseline quota coming from other state baseline quotas. That was never in the document. Now, I do recognize that at the February policy board meeting, or the February board meeting where we discussed the allocations, several states did modify option B during motions. However, I will also say that that was never thoroughly discussed at the meeting. I went back and looked through the minutes. And accordingly, it was never thoroughly discussed what types of proposals would actually fall within the boundaries of the draft amendment to increase New York's baseline allocation during the policy board's remand. Now, while I acknowledge that option B seems to be the basis of the proposals to modify the baseline allocations here today, I would also like to point out that option B in the draft acknowledged the unique position of Connecticut sitting at 1% and actually states that New York's baseline allocation was not to change as a result. So looking at page 10 of the draft amendment, we said specifically we were to hold New York and Delaware allocations constant. New York has experienced a similar substantial increase in black sea bass abundance in state waters. Therefore, a reduction to the New York allocation is not proposed. So when we gave our percentage allocation to Connecticut's baseline from our baselines, New York did not contribute there. So at first, because of the discrepancies that I read in the draft, I was going to make a motion to table these motions to allow for further consideration by the PDT, essentially just to ensure that we're operating within the constraints of the draft amendment options. But however, I was made aware that this could prolong the process in a way that this might go back to the policy board, thereby allowing them to make this decision for us. And since I don't want to move us in that direction, I will simply leave these thoughts as a support of reducing New York's baseline increase. As throughout the draft amendment, we already acknowledged that New York's Long Island Sound increase and already addressed it by not reducing their baseline to increase Connecticut's.
Thank you very much for that, Shanna. So let me just add a bit of additional context to Shanna's comments. That commission policy is essentially silent on what comes next in an appeal process if a species board does not comply with a remand from the policy board. So given, and again I'll turn to staff if there's something that I'm not conveying properly here. So if we don't take corrective action here today, the policy board would likely get the next crack at telling us what to do, whether that would be going back out to the species board again, whether we have the opportunity to send it to somebody else for other ideas like a PDT that Shanna touched on, or whether they might just make a decision themselves. Do you have anything in your comments, Shanna, that you feel you need staff to respond to with regards to the validity of what we're doing here today and being in bounds? Or are you comfortable with the information you have in front of you at this point, and just wanted to get your thoughts on the record?
So I think from my perspective, Adam, I already understand what ASMFC's interpretation of what we're doing here today is. I guess I'd want to clarify, are we specifically using option B as the basis of the proposals to change baseline allocation today? I think some clarification there would be useful.
All right, I'll turn to staff for their thoughts with regards to the basis with the appeal and what the policy board did, if they can respond to that concern.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'll start and then see if Bob has anything additional to add. When the PDT worked on this document, they looked at it as two parts. First is looking at the baseline allocations and then making a change to the either regional adjustments or maybe it was triggers, you know, depended on the option that was in the document. But for today's purpose, we're just looking at the baseline allocations. We're not thinking about the options for the how the quota was distributed after the baseline allocations were adjusted. I'll say that just for everybody's information, it would have been staff's advice that this change to New York's allocation would have been in bounds from what was considered for what went out for public comment. That is because the concept of changing New York's baseline allocation was in the addendum itself. And then the impacts to the other states in terms of quota coming off the baseline was considered, because in the option where Connecticut received additional quota, they could have received up to 4%. So the impacts to the other states were given in the addendum document. This splits the 4%, 2 to Connecticut and 2 to New York. So that would be in bounds. And as I said before, we're just looking at the baseline adjustments here. We're not thinking about any of the rest of the option of the regions. The PDT had intentionally split that into two parts.
All right, so thanks for that, Tony. I appreciate putting that on the record, and I think at this point I'll just leave it with that. While there may be people around the table that may not completely agree with that interpretation, that's the interpretation we have before us at this point to work with. And really the only other option at this point would be to not take action at the species board, which would put it back in the policy board's hands. All right, next up I have Emerson Hasbrook. Then I'll look for additional speakers. Emerson, you're up next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had an opportunity earlier and I provided my comments when I made the motion. So, and what I'd like to do, Mr. Chairman, with your permission, is yield my opportunity right now to Jim Gilmore. I know he's on the list, but he hasn't had an opportunity to speak in favor of the motion yet. So I would like to yield to him.
Given that Mr. Gilmore is also from the state of New York, I'll go ahead and allow that. Jim, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 1 second. We have new computers on a new build. All right. Sorry. And I've heard some of the conversation, and I guess and I understand, you know, some of the things from the southern states and their arguments, but I would characterize it a little different than a fish grab. We're really trying to get into managing this fishery, and I won't go into it. I think it was said very well by John McMurray and Nicola Meserve that, you know, there's a lot of changes that have occurred in Long Island Sound, including, you know, our very viable lobster fishermen many years ago. That's completely gone. But now that's been replaced by other species, and this is, you know, getting to that point about climate change. We're going to be dealing with this on a regular basis, and I understand that, you know, some perspectives might be that we're trying to grab more fish. We're just trying to manage a viable fishery in the Sound, and a very limited fishery. And again, this has been an increase in a specific water body. We're having trouble and difficulties with the ocean fishery because of that increase. So we really have two very large bodies of water where we have a significant amount of black sea bass. But understanding at least some of the opinions I've heard from the southern states, at this point, at least to maybe move this along, I would like to offer another amendment to the motion at your discretion, Mr. Chairman.
So my sense is that Robert's rules would allow that. I think that if you're looking to change the 2% to 1% amendment, you would take something in the form of a substitute. I would just caution you that if you're looking to do something between 1 and 2%, that it might be better to allow this amendment to become the main motion, and then once you know whether or not this amendment has passed, to make another motion if you don't agree with the outcome of that, as opposed to going ahead and trying to change it at this point to something between 1 and 2%.
Then I can defer to after the vote on this, and then if I'll reserve the right to make an amendment at that point. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, if you're comfortable with that, I think that's probably the best way forward right now. Okay, so I've got the original list of speakers have all had the opportunity to speak. I will go ahead and ask again for people that want to speak. At this point, I'll be asking, do you want to speak in favor of the motion to amend or in opposition to it? I would ask that people that do want to put their hands up to speak in favor of against at this point, do so if you have some new information that we haven't talked about so far, or something you feel is critically important to get on the record or not. So let me look for a show of hands that want to speak in favor of the motion to amend. Tom Foti, I've seen your hand up for a bit. Did you want to speak in favor of the motion to amend?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Chris Bat-Savage, I have your hand up. You want to speak in favor of the motion to amend?
Yes, please.
Okay. Let me see a list of hands of people who would like to speak in opposition to the motion to amend. Okay, Jim, I've got your hand up. I know we just heard from you, but I'll get you on the record here to further speak on that motion to amend. All right, so, and I've got Tony Delernia. All right, so we've got 2 in favor, 2 opposed. Let's go ahead and get through these comments, and then we'll see if we need to take further comment or not. Tom Foti.
Yeah, I understand New York's problem, but I really understand that we all have the same problem. You know, New York keeps saying that the range is changing. Well, they've said that on summer flounder. They've said that on a bunch of other species. But New Jersey's, sorry about that. That's a bell I can't turn off. But I wanted to basically explain what's going on. We have the same problem. We basically have more fish coming up. We have the same amount of pressure on those species. We basically force our people to basically we shorten the season, so they basically, and they don't have bycatches as great as they could have, because it's just, we're in the same situation. We also have Raritan Bay, we also have Delaware Bay, which is another situation going on. And we understand the problems going on. But to always come in and say, well, we're being treated unfairly because of global warming, and using global warming as an excuse for reallocation. And that's why some of us have been really very cautious about using global warming as an excuse for basically reallocation, because it does turn into a fish grab. And New Jersey's been at the foot of New York doing this, whether it was summer flounder, whether it was striped bass, or whether it was a bunch of other things they basically have done over the years. And they wonder why we feel this tension. We don't have the same tension with Delaware, but it seems like New York always is crying foul on us and basically trying to grab quota. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Jim Gilmore.
Thanks, Chairman. I just a couple of additional brief comments. And again, our intent on this is really managing the fishery as it exists today and moving forward. And I think that's something that we all have to start doing more of. This is really not an intent to try to, again, grab fish or do anything that we're trying to feather our nest. We're trying to manage the fishery the best we can based upon what's going on in 2021. The only two other points I will add is that, again, and seen in the other graphs, is that New York's landings are 4 times higher than Connecticut. So even with that 2% increase, we're going to have a difficulty in managing this because we have a much larger, fishery. So that 2% increase helps us out tremendously, but doesn't get us to a, whirlwind fishery that some people think we're going to have. 1% very clearly does not give us a viable fishery. We are going to continue to have closures. We are continuing to have low trip limits, and essentially the fishing community in New York are going to have a very difficult time making a living. So 1% just doesn't get us there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chris Batsavage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I support the 1% increase instead of 2%, and I'm looking at it by how much states, especially in the southern region, that fully utilize or mostly fully utilize their black sea bass quota are losing by going to 2% to New York versus 1%. And I know it's still not a lot, but compared to like whole numbers, but still on a percentage basis, it adds up when you look at the 600,000 pound quota or whatever. And going by the 2% increase it's kind of a disproportionate reduction for states like Virginia, for instance, that largely utilize their quota. North Carolina hasn't utilized their quota in the last few years, just due to the nature of our fishery. But I think the 1% helps New York's cause, mitigates some of the additional loss of quota by states in the southern region where black sea bass are still quite abundant and they utilize most of their quota. So I kind of see this as a middle ground. With other allocation decisions that we've made for species where the allocations have been in place for a long time, it's an iterative approach. We don't get to the full level that some people would like to see the first time around, and that's how I envision this state commercial allocation action for black sea bass. Is we're moving things forward from where they were 20 years ago, and we're committed to reviewing this allocation decision in 5 years, and we'll see how the stock what the stock looks like as far as distribution goes, and how the fisheries are operating in all the states, and make changes from there. But I think this is a reasonable path forward based on my comments and other comments made today. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Tony Delarnia.
Yeah. Someone just spoke about how things were 20 years ago or so ago. Yeah, 20 years or so ago, sitting at the council, if someone needed some help, folks were able to help someone out. They were able to negotiate. They were imagining themselves in the position the other person was in and saying, well, how can I help them? How can I try to do this? That thinking seems to have disappeared. Let's face it, the folks that don't want to give up quota are the states that have more quota than New York. And I even heard that some states, whatever, not even reaching their quota, yet they don't want to give them up, or they want to give up such a small percentage that it really amounts to nothing. This has become a hooray for me and too bad for you type of situation. And I'm very disappointed with some of the folks sitting here. And that's all I have to say, really. I'm disappointed. Is there a way can we return back to the way things were? Perhaps not. I don't know. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. So at this point, we've had quite a few speakers. We've covered a lot of different ground here. Are there any other board or council members that feel they need to raise a point to speak on something that hasn't been touched on during this debate between these two motions? Okay, I've got Dan Farnham's hand up. Is there anyone else that feels they need to raise an issue that we haven't touched on? All right, so I've got 3 hands. Dan, are you intending to speak in favor or in opposition to the motion to amend?
That would be in opposition, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Sonny Gwynn, in favor or in opposition of the motion to amend? Sonny, it looks like you're unmuted in the app. I don't know if you're unmuted on your device.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, there you go. You're good. Were you in favor or in opposition of the motion to amend?
I was in favor.
Okay. And Joe Semino, were you in favor or opposed to the motion to amend? You made the motion. I assume you're in favor still of it, to speak in favor of it?
Yes, Mr. Chair, and I never quite got a chance to give my rationale but I obviously did speak to my thinking of this originally, but there is one other point that I would like to make the chance.
All right, so I'm going to go to Sonny, I'm going to go to Dan, I'm going to go to Joe. At that point, I'm going to go out to the public to talk about both of these motions. At that point, we are then going to come back to the Board or Council to see if there are any other topics that need to be discussed that weren't brought up. We will then caucus, and we will then vote on the motion to amend. And based on that outcome, we'll decide whether to vote on the main motion or whether we need to pursue other motions at that point. So I've got Sonny Gwynn, Dan Farnham, Joe Semino, then the public. Go ahead, Sonny.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I've been sitting here listening, and I keep hearing climate change, climate change, climate change. And I would just wish that we could go out there and let the fish know that there's climate change and they're all shifting to the north. Because it's so hard to sit here, and I know the southern states are losing fish with these reallocation issues because of climate change. But somebody needs to tell the fish, because we're seeing more black sea bass than we've ever seen down here. We will be catching our quotas up. And I feel for New York. I feel for them. But I think what we're doing is fair. It's the 1% is fair with the reallocation that we just did. It's going to put us in the same spot. We're taking fish from down here on the southern end where there's plenty of fish, and what we've historically caught, until now we're not going to be able to catch them, and we're going to be in the same boat. But like I said, I just wish somebody would let the fish know that it's climate change and they're supposed to be all up in up north, and they're not. We're seeing a lot of sea bass. Thank you for the comment, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Sonny. And for the record, I'll be happy to join you in the same boat with you any day of the week. Just go ahead and invite me. Thank you. Dan Farnham, you're up next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the beginning of our process earlier today, I think Eric Reed had a question for the New York, contingency here, that if New York did get an increase in quota, would they guarantee that the Long Island Sound fishermen would be able to catch it? The fact of the matter is that New York's Long Island Sound fishermen are catching that quota already. No matter what we vote on here today, no matter what we debate today, the fact is that New York's Long Island Sound fishermen are catching 3.5% of the quota, like it or not. And I understand everybody's point. Nobody wants to give up quota. I get that completely. I'm a commercial fisherman. I've been doing it for 40-something years. Nobody wants to give anything up. But what really we don't want to do is throw dead fish over the side either. Very good. Thank you.
And Dan, I'll be happy to join you in your boat as well. I'll join anybody in anybody's boat. Just go ahead and let me know when we're going. Joe Cimino, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I kind of want to speak to the concept that the 1% of the commercial quota would make a viable fishery for New York, knowing that, you know, we have a commercial reallocation hanging over our heads, and every commercial fisherman paying attention knows that in the black sea bass world, they stand to lose the most. We're looking at, you know, a 10% potential, as much as greater than 10% shift away from the overall coastwide commercial quota to the recreational fishery, which would more than wipe out anything we're fighting over right this minute. So unless all of those that are opposed to this amendment are planning on voting for status quo there, I'm kind of not even sure what we're fighting over at this point.
All right, thanks, Joe. As I indicated, I will next go out to the public, and then I will come back to the board. So let me see a show of hands from the public that would like to speak. To try to keep this balanced, let me first ask for hands that want to speak in favor of the motion to amend. Okay, I got one hand up, Greg DiDomenico. Let me see a show of hands that want to speak in opposition to the motion to amend. Okay, I've got Bonnie Brady. All right, Greg, we'll go ahead and James, you got your hand up. You're going to speak in opposition to the motion to amend, James Fletcher. All right, well, we'll come back to James. Don't hear what he is. So we had Bonnie, I saw your hand up before Greg, so I'm going to go ahead and go to you first here. Go ahead, and please speak to both of these motions, or quite frankly, anywhere within this range. Now would be the appropriate time for public comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Super. This is Bonnie Brady, Long Island Commercial Fishing Association. We're opposed to the motion to amend. I know that's not shocking. Obviously, you all have heard New York's points. I think Dewey had asked a question about who was catching what fish in the Sound, and basically, Dewey, it's an explosion. The black sea bass are everywhere, and they are in such numbers now that last year obviously was a wash because of COVID, but we were closed for 6 solid weeks the year before. You can't get away from them, frankly. And this opposition to changing the motion is because basically we want to be able to keep and have a fishery and not just instead contribute to discards, which obviously all of you from various states know. Commercially, if we go exponentially over them, that may affect us, and not just perhaps New York in a pound for pound bayback. So we would appreciate any consideration that you all have regarding this issue, and allow not just those that fish in the Sound, but those that fish in ocean waters not be negatively impacted as a result of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. Greg DiDomenico, and you can assume we can hear you unless in 10 seconds I tell you we can't hear you.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. I'll be as brief as possible. Greg DiDomenico, Lund's Fisheries, Cape May, New Jersey. Obviously, everybody realizes this is controversial, and I don't want to take a position today that creates an adversarial position with anybody, to be perfectly honest with you, on this topic. But I do want to go over a few things. First, get it out of the way and say that we do support the amended motion to change the 2% to 1%. But I say that in the hopes of, or at least the anticipation of, that this issue is not going to go away. And so my concern is that this will continue to be a topic at the commission and the council. And there has to be some meaningful long-term solutions. This is not the one, but allocation is not the only solution. Right now, it's the only topic for every problem that we have, and it's not. And until we do something else or look outside of allocation issues to solve these problems, this is going to continue to be adversarial. And my experience with this is a very simple one that some people will remember. I believe it was Addendum 5. It was about 10 to 12 years ago. The state of New Jersey gave up 55,000 pounds of fluke over a 2-year period voluntarily to states that didn't have fish. Now, the bargain for that 55,000 pounds was that those who received additional fish through this voluntary transfer of fluke would take care of the issues in their own states that were contributing to these problems, such as discards and associated problems with low quotas. That never happened. And so I don't know at this point whether or not there's a lasting solution or a meaningful solution, but I do have to wonder about what are the management climate within these particular states. Have they controlled entrance? Have they controlled gear? Have they controlled the people that continue to get these permits? I don't know. So I think that has to be made perfectly clear. And then lastly, I do want to remind everybody that we are at an all-time high for black sea bass, an all-time high for fluke. I don't recall if black sea bass is 190% rebuild or 200% rebuild or 150% rebuild, but perhaps the issue with these allocations and low quotas in certain states lie in our continued, in some cases, perhaps in black sea bass, our continued conservative ABCs and OFLs and all the rest that goes into the specifications process. If there are so many fish, if there are so many black sea bass, why are we just not adding to the quota to solve these problems? I know that's, again, a larger question and a larger problem, and I don't want to have quotas that exceed the scientific advice. But if we don't start talking about the other issues associated with black sea bass and fluke and only focus on allocation, this is exactly where we will wind up. Wind up arguing over small percentages and not dealing with the main topics. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Back to the board and the council. Is there anyone else that needs to speak on something that we haven't heard about or need to get something on the record before we break the caucus? Shanna Madsen, go ahead. Shanna, if you are speaking, you're muted. You're unmuted in the app. There you go. You're good to go. Okay.
Mr. Chair. Yeah, I hit my hand down button instead of the unmute button. So this is something kind of outside of this vote, but is something that I believe that this board should maybe consider taking to the policy board. You know, I've spent a lot of time in documents over these past few weeks, and I remember going back to reading our discussions during the policy board, where several states had large issue with the fact that the policy board continuously said that the discussion that was coming before them was not about allocation. And then a couple votes later, the policy board voted to tell this board how to reallocate. I looked through the ASMFC appeals process document, and I do know that the policy board is able to give guidance on how a management program should be modified. But respectfully, I believe that the policy board is not the proper body to give guidance on how to address allocation issues. This allows states that have not been part of this several-year process sit at a disadvantage to understanding the intricacies of the draft amendment. They were asked to weigh in on how the board should be reallocating. And in my mind, that sets a pretty dangerous precedent for upcoming allocation decisions. And I do believe that this issue should be studied potentially by the allocation work group that the commission has brought together. So I'd kind of like to see maybe this board push that forward to the policy board and onto the allocation work group. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, well, let's get to appreciate those comments. Let's work through these motions here first, and then we can see if the species board wants to do anything here specific today. If not, I certainly think you can bring your comments to the policy board, either yourself, and if you're not actually a member of the policy board for your state, have your state administrative commissioner directly bring that. But let's get back to these motions. Thank you for this comment. So with that, we're going to take, we'll try for 3 minutes here for a caucus. What I would ask states to do while they're caucusing is to consider this amendment, consider the main motion, and also consider the possibility of anything that might occur for something in between these, depending on whether or not this becomes the main motion, and if there's any other subsequent motions. So go to caucus for 3 minutes, and then we'll come back. Thank you. Okay, thanks to staff provided timer here. We are returning from caucus, and we are going to turn to the board for the vote. The vote will be conducted in a roll call manner. I will defer to staff to decide what order to conduct that vote. But we are looking for 12 votes on the motion to amend. So staff, I'll go ahead and turn to you to conduct that roll call vote for the board.
Mr. Chair, if we could just do the hands in favor and I'll call out the states.
That'll be fine if that meets the needs of the outlined voting procedures. So let's go ahead and have hands raised for those states that are in support of the motion to amend. One hand per jurisdiction, please.
Just letting the hands settle. I have Delaware, Maryland, New Jersey, Virginia, North Carolina, and Potomac River Fisheries Commission.
Okay, so we have 6 votes in favor. We could put those hands down, clear them. Very good. All those opposed to the motion for the board, please.
Letting the hands settle. I have Massachusetts, New York, Connecticut, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island. And Mr. Chair, we're not looking for 12 votes. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service does not sit on black sea bass. They only sit on summer flounder.
Right, but I believe we've got 11 so far, and I believe we still have the service here to consider as the 12th vote.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Sorry.
My apologies for openly disagreeing with staff.
Yeah. Sorry, I wasn't counting correctly in my head.
No problem. Looking for abstentions.
abstention, no fisheries.
Okay, so that gives us our 12 votes, so I don't have to call for no votes. So this motion passes the board by a vote of 6 in favor, 5 opposed, with 1 abstention. Chairman Luisi, I will turn to you to conduct the vote for the council.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the council will now vote on the motion to amend to change the original motion from 2% to 1% as an increase to the baseline for New York based on its appeal to the policy board at ASMFC. So I will say that because we made like motions here, while the board has to make a change, the council does not. However, there's a consequence to the council not moving along in lockstep or, locking arms with our partners at the commission on this because of the issue with the allocations being put into the federal FMP. If the council decides to not support this motion at all, there will be a challenge with the service because we'll have 2 different allocation scenarios, one at the board level, one at the state level, and one at the federal level. So I think it has been stated during the meeting, but I just wanted everybody to be aware. I'm not going to. So I think I've clarified what it is we're voting on as a council, and so again, this motion is to amend from 2% to 1%. And I will go ahead. I can't see hands, so Tony, you're going to have to help me out on this one. Why don't I go ahead and call for all of those in favor of the motion to amend from 2% to 1%? Can you please raise your hand at this time? And I'm going to have Tony either read the names or count, whatever you prefer, Tony.
I can read the names since the public can't see them either. David.
I can't see them. Go ahead.
Yep. David Stormer, Kate Wilkie, Sunny Gwynn, Peter Hughes, Sarah Winslow, Chris Kuhn, Joe Cimino, Wes Townsend, Michelle Duvall, Scott Lennox, Chris Batsavage, Dewey Hemmelwright, Ellen Bolin, and Adam Nowalski.
Okay, thank you for that, Tony. I counted 14 as you were reading those names off. I think you can confirm that that's the same count that you got.
I'll ask Julia to do that.
Okay.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so if everyone can put their hands down, or Tony, if you can lower
I'll put
the hands.
Down for everyone.
Yep, I appreciate that. And let's go ahead, and I'm going to ask for those in opposition of the motion to amend. Can you please raise your hand at this time?
Just letting the hands settle.
Yep.
I have Maureen Davidson, Paul Reese, Tony Delernia, and Dan Farnham. That's
Okay.
it.
Okay, that's 4 on my count.
I agree.
We can lower those hands, and I'm going to ask for any abstentions to the motion to amend.
I have 1 abstention, Mike Pentney.
Okay, so the service is abstaining. So the motion passes 14 to 4 to 1. Chairman Nowalski, I'm going to go back to you. There should not be a 0 at the end. We do not have null votes at the council since everyone has a vote. So 14 to 4 to 1, the motion passes. Therefore, the motion to amend based on the board and the council's vote has passed. Chairman, I'm going to bring it back to you to conduct the remainder of the main motion.
Very good. Thank you very much. And again, just for clarification, we did not require that the motion pass both bodies for it to be valid by the board, but certainly helpful, I think, in terms of what we're trying to accomplish today.
Yeah,
All right,
that's a really
so
good point, Adam. We do need to make it clear. I know you did it earlier, but before we vote on the main motion, even if the board passes the motion, it will, even if the council does not, it will still pass the board. So that's a good clarification. I appreciate that. I'm going to go back on mute.
Yep, fair enough. We've certainly so used to doing this jointly that's what we're used to doing. So appreciate everybody's patience as we work through this modified process today. All right, so this brings us back to the main motion. If staff could now put this up as the modified motion with the 2% changing to 1%, since it's been amended by both the council and the board. It's now the property of both bodies. Thank you very much. So the amended main motion now reads, move to increase New York's baseline allocation in a manner comparable to the consideration given Connecticut for the expansion of black sea bass into Long Island Sound. New York's baseline allocation for black sea bass will be increased by 1%. This action maintains Connecticut's baseline allocation of 3% and maintains the percentage of quota redistributed according to the regional biomass. The remaining states' baseline quotas will be adjusted consistent with the allocation tables provided during this meeting. So I will now ask for anybody who wants to speak to do something to this motion with regards to a need for an amendment or a substitute to it. Jim Gilmore, I will turn to you first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to move to amend the New York's baseline allocation for black sea bass will be increased by 1.75%.
Oh my God.
Okay, so I have a motion by the board for 1.75%. Let me go ahead and see if there's a second by another state. I will ask one more time. Is there a second to this motion from the board from another state? Okay, I just got Jay McNamee's hand went up. Are you seconding this motion, Jay?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so we now have a motion on behalf of the board to increase the allocation by 1.75%. Let me make it clear that it is not my intention today to debate these numbers to tenths or hundredths of a percent ad nauseum. It was my hope that we would perhaps stick to 0.5%. I understand the desire on New York's part to do what they feel is in the best interest of their fishermen. I think that 0.25% are in line with things that staff has looked at along the way. I do not believe we saw 1.75% earlier. I know that staff has the ability to put up those allocations if anybody needs to see them. I think most people have a pretty good idea what this does, but staff does have the ability to put something up. I will just say that I will entertain the ability to look at stuff at halves and 0.25%, but that's it. We're not going to parse this any more than that. So we have a motion by the board. Do we have a like motion by the council? Paul Reese, are you making this motion for the council?
Yes, I am, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay. Do I have a second on behalf of the council? Dan Farnham, are you seconding this motion on behalf of the council?
Yes, I am, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay. So we now have a valid motion here by both the board. We also have a valid motion by the council. Again, the board motion would stand on its own. I am going to allow up to 2 speakers to do pro and con. I don't really think the nature of the debate is going to be any different than what we've heard so far. I will turn to Mr. Gilmore to go ahead and provide input with things that he'd like to. I will then also turn to Mr. Reese if he would like to provide comments in favor. Are there 2 people who would like to speak in opposition to this motion? Okay, I'm not seeing any. I've got Tom Foti and Mike Luisi. All right, so we're going to limit debate to that. So we're going to go Jim Gilmore, Tom Foti, Paul Reese, Mike Luisi, and then we're going to go ahead and take a vote on this question. Go ahead, Jim.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I agree. We don't need to debate this more. I'll just make the simple comment that we are now arguing over mostly hundreds of percentage points, maybe a tenth of a percent or whatever at that point. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Tom Foti.
Yeah, Greg brought up the arguments I was going to make in the beginning. I kind of forgot when I was speaking. We're fighting over scraps. These quotas make no sense whatsoever, whether it's summer flounder and black sea bass. And that's why we're basically trying to mess with each other over with the quota. The quota should be bigger. There's no sense of what we're doing. I mean, I've been yelling that for 15 years now, and it basically causes these problems. And again, New Jersey gave up 20% of the quota, and Bruce Freeman, I remember when he did it, got a lot of flack over it and basically took it, but we tried to make the plan work. I think we're the only state that gave up that much quota on any species to try and make a plan work. And we're looking at basically not doing it again with these small quotas.
Paul Reese.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I was really feeling 2% was appropriate, so 1.75 is closer. And in New York, scraps are really important for us. They'll help a lot. Thank you.
Chairman Luisi.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'll be really quick. You know, I think we could do this all day. We could go back and forth. And I know that that's not what your intention is, to be debating over fractions of a percent. But I feel like, you know, for the states that are going to be giving up the most in this, we reached a compromise in that last vote on the amended motion to 1%. You know, it was clear that the southern states supported it, the northern states didn't, but it is a compromise, it is a partnership, and we're doing what we can to try to maintain the fisheries that we have, although they haven't changed and they're not diminished at all, as you know, based on what Sonny was talking about. You know, they're seeing more sea bass down here than they have in years past. I think that was a good compromise at 1%, and therefore, you know, speaking for the state of Maryland, we cannot support the 1.75 at this time. Hopefully, you know, I think Greg DiDomenico mentioned during public comment that, you know, with the new assessment that's going to be available soon, perhaps the quotas will increase and everybody can get a little bigger piece of the pie. So, you know, that's my hope. And, you know, I think debating over fractions of a percent, we could do this all day, and I just don't think it's worth. I don't think it's worth the time of the board. We found a compromise that was voted up by the board and the council, and I think we should move forward in that direction. So I'll be opposing this motion. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So before we vote on this, Robert's rules would allow somebody to further amend or substitute or take some action on this motion to amend. I would advise that we just try to get to main motions and work off of that. But again, if there's somebody who feels that something's in order from Robert's rules perspective, I'll entertain that and decide. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and take a vote on this question. Tom Foti, your hand is still up. Did you have something else to do, or was that left over? Okay, that's now down. Thank you very much. And do we need to go ahead, staff, and just show what the table of 1.75% would look like and include anything here at this point?
Adam, that would be good for the record, just to note it for the voting. So Maya, if you could give control to Savannah while the states caucus, and just note for the record that on the screen, we will be looking at the allocations if New York's baseline were to increase by 1.75%.
Okay, I wasn't intending on caucusing for an extended period of time, but go ahead, and while Savannah's getting that up, then we'll give everybody one more minute after Savannah gets that table up. And none of this would need to be read at this point. With the nature of these webinars being recorded, we'd have this as video part of the record. Tony, would that be correct?
That is correct, Adam.
While people are also caucusing, let me also add that should this motion not pass the board, we will then need to do something with the council motion. Options would be, once it does not pass the board, I would go back to the original maker of the motion and give them the opportunity to withdraw the motion if they so desire with the consent of the council, or we'll have to go ahead and just take the vote on the council motion so that we can dispense with it. Again, due to the nature of what we're doing, this isn't technically a joint vote, so we do have to treat these separately. All right, let's go ahead and get to a vote on this. So for the board on the motion to amend, and let's go ahead and get the motion page back up from staff. Okay, on the motion to amend the New York baseline black sea bass allocation to be increased by 1.75%, motion by Mr. Gilmore, seconded by Dr. McNamee, for the board. All those states and jurisdictions in favor, please raise their hand of the motion to amend.
I have Massachusetts, New York, New Hampshire, Rhode Island.
Okay, we've got 4 in favor. Clear those hands, please. All those opposed, please raise a hand.
Letting the settle here. I have Delaware, Maryland, New Jersey, Virginia, North Carolina, and Potomac River Fisheries Commission.
I have 6 opposed. Abstentions.
No fisheries.
1 abstention. Do we have a null vote?
1 null vote with Connecticut.
Okay, the motion fails. The board motion fails. 4 in favor, 6 opposed, 1 abstention, 1 null vote. So, Mr. Chairman, I will turn to you to dispense with the motion. Again, you might request that the original maker with the consent may choose to withdraw the motion. If they choose not to, then I believe you're going to have to go ahead and conduct a vote on this.
Okay.
I see John L. made his hand up. Does he have something else to add before we do that procedurally?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure if we appropriate. The motion is perfected and before the council. I don't know that we can withdraw it at this point.
Yeah, my sense was that if the maker requested it and had consent of the council, yes, but if you feel we just need to go ahead and vote on it, and that's your direction, then I'll defer to the chair to how he wants to proceed.
Yeah, so thanks, Adam. So John, you think we need to call a vote here on this one?
I mean, I think with the motion perfected before the council, yeah, we probably should hold on it.
Okay, yeah, let's go ahead and do that then. We'll just make it clear as to the intent of the council. So to the council, we have a motion to amend the New York baseline black sea bass allocation to be increased by 1.75%. If the council is ready for the question, I'm going to go ahead and call for those in support of the motion to amend. If you can raise your hand, and then Tony can call out the names and take a count.
Okay, I have in favor Paul Reese, Tony Delernia, and Dan Farman.
Okay, thanks, Tony.
Sorry, I have one more, Maureen Davidson. Apologize.
That's okay. All right, so that was 4 in favor. Yep. Got a dog walking by the house here. Let's go ahead and I'll go on mute, but let's all those opposed to the motion to amend, please raise your hand.
Just letting the hands settle for a second. All right, I have David Stormer, Kate Wilkie, Sunny Gwynn, Peter Hughes, Sarah Winslow, Chris Kuhn, Joe Semino, Wes Townsend, Michelle Duvall, Scott Lennox, Chris Bat-Savage, Dewey Hemmelwright, and Ellen Bolin.
Did you get a count on that, Tony? Or was Julia taking a count? I wasn't able to count that one. I was trying to get the dog settled down.
I got 13.
Yep, 13.
13. Okay. So let's go ahead and clear hands. And are there any abstentions?
I'm sorry, there should have been 14. I forgot to say Adam's name. He can't raise his hand.
Oh, okay. Okay.
That's my bad. I'm really failing you, Mike.
No, you're doing great, Tony. There's challenges throughout the day, all day long. So you're doing a great job.
For your abstentions, I have one from NOAA Fisheries, Mike Pitney.
From the service, okay. Okay, so we had a vote of 4 to 14 to 1 is what the council vote was on this motion to amend. So the motion also fails the council, which brings it back to the main motion, and I'm going to turn it back to Chairman Nowalski to conduct the vote by the board on this one.
All right, very good. So we're back to the main motion again. I will ask one more time, is there anything else to come before we vote on the main motion? Emerson Hasbrook.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to amend the main motion to change 1% to 1.5%.
So based on what I've heard so far, I will say this. I think I'm providing an extreme amount of latitude in providing a third bite at the apple here. So let me just make clear that I will allow this. We will immediately look for a second. Same on the council, immediately go to a vote. But I am not going to go beyond this motion, given what I've heard so far and where I believe these bodies intend to go at this point. So with that being said, again, I think a third opportunity to make a motion is a lot of latitude here. Is this the motion you would like to make in light of that?
Yes,
That's
Mr.
a
Chairman.
yes. Okay. So again, I think I'm extending an extreme degree of latitude here. Let's try to move through this. Move to amend to change 1% to 1.5%. Motion made by Mr. Hasbrook. I saw Dan Farnham's hand was up. Are you seconding this, Dan?
Actually, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I was going to ask if we could caucus for 20 seconds before Emerson did that, but it might be too late. That's your decision. Thank you.
I need to have a motion to caucus on. So what I would allow is that if there is a second, I will pause for a moment to allow, it sounds like principally your state to decide if you want to go forward with this or withdraw it before we have any debate. So let me first ask if you do want to go ahead and make a second or not, Dan.
You need a second from the board, not from Dan. Dan's on the council.
You're right. My apologies. Thank you, Tony. Do I have a second from the board? Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Jay McNamee, are you seconding this from the board?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Thank you very much. So for the council, let me just give New York 30 seconds here to decide if their council representation is going to go ahead with a motion before I ask for that. Okay, for the council, is there a like motion to move to amend to change 1% to 1.5%? Dan, I still see your hand up. I'm not sure if it was up for that purpose. I don't see it up anymore. Emerson, your hand is up, but you're a board member. And Jim Gilmore, I see your hand up, but I believe Maureen is the council member here. Okay, so I see Maureen hand up. You are making this motion on behalf of the council. Looks like in the app you're on mute, Maureen. If you can unmute yourself in the app, if you can verbally confirm.
Sorry. Thank you. Yes, I would like to make a motion for the council. However, my motion is going to be different than the one that was made by Mr. Hasbrook.
I am going to only allow at this point a like motion. So would you like to make a like motion on behalf of the council or not?
Yes.
Okay, I have Dan Farnham's hand up. Dan, are you making a second to the council motion?
Yes, I would like to do that, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay. Again, given the extensive debate we have had on these at this point, we are going to go right to the question at this point.
Mr. Chairman,
unless, do you have a point of order you'd like to raise, Mr. Gilmore? Again, I believe I've extended the extreme amount of latitude at this point. If you have a point of order you'd like to raise, I'll be happy to entertain that. Beyond that, we're going to go ahead and vote on the motion.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you for the indulgence. We, that 1 minute during that caucus, we agreed that we would change the 1.5 to 1.25. And I believe both for the board and the council motions. So since this was going to be the last opportunity and understanding what the southern states have brought up, whatever, we would like to change that percentage from 1 to 1.25. And again, it's Mr. Hatbrook's motion, so he would have to change it, and Ms. Davidson, but that's what we would like to pursue, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
John Almeida, do you have any objection to both of them making that change as a friendly at this point, or do you feel we need to formally have the motions withdrawn and remade?
Well, we haven't discussed
For the council side.
Where we haven't discussed the motion yet, I don't really have a problem with that as a friendly.
Staff, do you have any concerns about doing that on the board side?
No, Adam.
Okay. So we now have a board motion made by Mr. Hasbrook, seconded by Dr. McNamee, moved to amend to change 1% to 1.25%. For the council, motion by Ms. Davidson, second by Mr. Farnham to do the same. Okay, we're going to go right to the question here at this point, unless there are any points of order that need to be raised. Otherwise, I'm going to request that hands be cleared at this point. Tom Foti, your hand is up. Do you have a point of order you wish to raise about the proceedings?
Yeah, I didn't hear this, the motion, the maker of the motion or the second of the motion at the board changed their motion. We changed the numbers, what Jim Gilmore said, but they were not, he was not the maker of the motion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hasbrook. And Dr. McNamee, can you verbally confirm for us that you are changing the motion to 1.25% from 1.5%?
I'm fine with that friendly to change it from 1.5 to 1.25.
Mr. Hasbrook is confirmed. Dr. McNamee?
I agree as well, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Chairman Luisi, do you have something you'd like to add at this point?
Yeah, just something real quickly, Adam. You have been very gracious to allow for these motions to amend. I've been receiving a lot of feedback on my phone and via text message and email. Would you allow for the consideration of a motion based on what we've gone through over the last 45 minutes for something less than 1% made by the board? You said this is the last change. We came up with a compromise at 1%, but I think there's some frustration growing, and I wonder if you would consider another amended motion for something less than 1%. I'm not advocating for it. I'm just asking you as a point of order whether or not this is the last amended motion that you're going to consider.
So I'm going to offer that if it is the intention of people to go ahead and advocate for something less than 1% at this point, I would encourage a voting down of the main motion. We then clear the table and we can start over at that point, would be my preferred way forward, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, that sounds great. That sounds good, Adam. I appreciate that. I just want to
I think it's a great point to bring forward. Again, when we've made these changes to these motions, as New York has brought them forward, if somebody else had raised their hand and made a motion for something lower than 1%, to be clear, I certainly would have recognized people at that time. If somebody had wanted to amend one of these amendments to change 1% to something lower as a third level of Robert's rules, I would have entertained those. Quite frankly, I haven't heard anybody bring that forward so far, but it's a valid point. And at this point, the way I would like to pursue that is if that is the intent of someone from the council or the board, when we get back to the main motion, to vote it down, clear the deck, and we'll go from there.
Mr. Chairman, can I just ask for Maya to put, it's in the back of my presentation, the slide up with the 1.25 allocation, since we haven't seen that.
That would be consistent with what we did for 1.75, so let's go ahead and do that.
And just for the verbal record, the presentation shows an increase in New York's baseline for 1.25%.
All right, very good. And Tom Foti and Mike Luisi, if you can both clear your hands as we prepare for the board vote. All right, let's go ahead and put the motions back up, please. We are voting on the motion to amend to change 1% to 1.25%. For the board, all those in favor, please raise a hand.
I have Massachusetts, New York, Connecticut, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island.
I count 5 in favor. Let's go ahead and clear those hands. All those opposed?
I have Delaware, Maryland, New Jersey, Virginia, North Carolina, and Potomac River Fisheries Commission.
Thank you, Tony. I have 6 in opposition. Abstentions?
I have NOAA Fisheries.
1 abstention. The motion fails the board. 5 in favor, 6 opposed, 1 abstention. Chairman Luisi?
Thank you, Adam. Let's go ahead and call the question to the council. The motion is to amend to change the 1% to 1.25%. All those in favor of the motion to amend, please raise your hand. And I'll have Tony call out the names.
I have Paul Reese, Tony DeLernia, and Dan Farnham.
Okay, that count is 3. If you can lower the hands, Tony. We'll go ahead and call for those in opposition to the motion to amend. If you can raise your hand, Tony can call out your names.
I have David Stormer, Sunny Gwynn, Peter Hughes, Sarah Winslow, Chris Kuhn, Joe Semino, Wes Townsend, Michelle Duvall, Scott Lennox, Chris Bat-Savage, Dewey Hemmelwright, and Ellen Bolin, and Adam Nowalski.
This is Kate Wilkie. My hand should have been up in opposition.
Okay, thanks, Kate. Yeah, we'll make a note of that. Tony, if you can make a note of that as well. And then give me a count. I wasn't counting with you as you mentioned the names. So we have 3 opposed.
That's Julia.
Is it 12 or 13 in opposition?
I think it should be 14. I think there were 12 hands raised, and then there was verbal addition of Adam Nowalski and Kate Wilkie.
Okay. Okay.
I don't know if Maureen's vote got counted.
Hello, hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you, Maureen.
Okay, I'm going to say my vote was for yes. I'm sorry, I was having some technical difficulty.
That's okay. I was having trouble with putting my hand up earlier too. All right, so that would be 4 in favor. And did you say it was 14 opposed, Julia?
Yeah, so it would make it 4, 14, and 1, which would make sense because that's how all the other numbers have lined up so far for all the
Yeah,
other motions.
okay. Yeah, and I never asked for abstentions, but I assume that the service is going to abstain. So maybe we just on the record, we can get that clarification that the service will abstain.
Yes, the service, Mike's hand is raised.
Okay, perfect. All right, so the motion to amend from 1 to 1.25 has failed both the board and the council. And so we're back to the main motion again, Adam. Chairman Nowalski, if I want to turn it back to you, and I don't know if you want to call the question at this point or consider other alternatives, but it's up to you.
So again, to be consistent, if there's something that my preference at this point is that if you are intending to do something less than 1%, my request would be that we do so by voting this down and then starting with a fresh slate. If there is somebody, again, to be fair, we were on the plus side of 1%. If somebody feels the need to go ahead and vote in move in another direction, I will entertain that. I will say that if we're going to go down that road, we will take a short break for a couple minutes beforehand. We will need to wrap up a couple of other council motions to tidy this up before we are done. So either we go down the road of voting this up or down. Assuming this were to get voted up, we would tidy things up with a couple of other council motions. It is our intention to conduct the FMP review at another time. So we're not going to have that on our plate. But again, if there's the desire by somebody from the board to move in another direction, we will fully consider that. Again, this has been a commission-driven issue at this point. The policy board's provided direction. I appreciate everyone's indulgence here today, but I want to make sure that we have fully considered this in hopes that we don't find ourselves back here with another appeal on this issue. So that's my goal here. Let me turn to Bill Hyatt. You've got your hand raised.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I just feel the need to say something here. I'd like to point out that during some of the discussion that pertained to percentage switches higher than 1%, some of the people, or at least one of the people speaking in opposition, referred to the 1% as an acceptable compromise. And at this point, this discussion has gone along for some time, and I would hope that feeling that 1% was an acceptable compromise holds forth herein, and we can take some action on this main motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill. Is there anyone else who feels the need to speak on behalf of this before we go ahead and vote on this? Again, at this point, this is a motion because it was amended. It is owned by both the board and the council jointly at this point, which is why you don't see makers or seconders on the screen. Not seeing any hands or hearing anything else, we are going to go ahead and conduct a vote on this motion. It has been read previously. It has been up on the board for quite some time, so I will not be reading it again. I will turn to the board to go ahead and conduct a vote on this motion. All those in favor of the motion,
Mr.
please
Chairman, can we caucus, please? Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, can we caucus before the vote, please?
I'll provide one more minute. I believe we've caucused multiple times, including the times when other baselines were up. we're going to go ahead and put up a 1-minute timer, and then we're going to go ahead and vote. Thank you very much.
Maya, will you put the 1% up for me, please? And note for the record, the screen shows 1%. Thank you, Maya.
Okay, the question to the board. All those in favor, please go ahead and raise a hand. And if staff would put the motions back up, please, just so it's clear what everyone's voting on.
Just waiting for the
staff, but before they get read, Tony, please make sure that the motion itself is on the board before you start reading them off, just so that we're crystal clear on what people are voting on.
Got it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Maya. I have, excuse me, Delaware, Maryland, Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Virginia, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, North Carolina, and Potomac River Fisheries Commission.
Very good. That looks like 11 in favor. Opposition? No opposition. Abstentions? One abstention from National Marine Fisheries Service. Sorry for doing your job there, Tony. We've got 11 in favor, 0 opposed, 1 abstention. Chairman Luisi.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's go ahead and bring this question to the council. All those council members in favor of main motion, which is an increase to New York's baseline allocation for black sea bass by 1%. If you're in favor of that motion, please raise your hand, and I'll have Tony call out the names.
Just letting the hands settle for a minute.
Yep, take your time, Tony.
I have Adam Nowalski, Maureen Davidson, David Stormer, Kate Wilkie, Sunny Gwen, Peter Hughes, Sarah Winslow, Chris Kuhn, Joe Semino, Wes Townsend, Michelle Duvall, Scott Lennox, Paul Reese, Tony Delernia, Chris Spatsavage, Dan Farnham, Dewey Hemmelwright, and Ellen Bolin.
Okay, thanks, Tony. Did we get a count on that? I was trying to keep track. I think I caught 15 or 16.
I got 18.
Did you get 18? Okay. Is that Julia?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. 18 in favor. We can put hands down. I'll go ahead and call for those in opposition to the main motion. You can raise your hand.
I see no hands.
Okay. Any abstentions?
Waiting to see if I get a hand.
I see one hand, Tony.
Oh, sorry.
I believe it's the hand you're
Pop all the
looking
way up.
for.
Mike Pitney has his hand up. No fisheries.
Okay.
Thanks, Adam.
Okay. So we have a motion to the council at 18 to 0 to 1. So the motion passes the council. And I think we've accomplished what it is you were set out to do, Mr. Chairman, today, which is to get both the council and the board in lockstep with one another on allocation changes. So I'm going to turn it back to you to see where we want to go from here.
All right. So again, my extreme appreciation to everyone on the board and council. I do believe I took some liberty in providing some latitude, but I think that was for the better in creating the record here to support what we've done together today. Let me first turn to commission staff. Are there any additional motions that are needed on behalf of the board in advance of completing this addendum process?
Adam, this is Bob. I'll check it. The short
go
answer
ahead.
is no additional actions are needed. The motion that was just passed by the board will modify the contents of addendum 33. So I think as far as the commission side of this goes, the board's all set.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Bob. Let me turn to staff, either from the board or the council, who I believe have been working together diligently this morning. While we've all been working, what is required on the council at this point? Earlier, we had rescinded the main motion. At the last meeting, the council had put a halt on the submission of the package. So what else is needed for council business? And then I'll turn to Chairman Luisi to administer what needs to be done.
This is Julia. I guess I'll chime in. I don't recall if we actually, or the council actually voted on that rescind motion. But in addition to that, there's also, we have a draft motion ready to go for basically resubmitting the amendment with the changes made today to the agency.
Chairman Luisi, I'll let you take over from here. My thinking is put that motion up and get any feedback from the service or general counsel about if they feel anything else is needed. But again, I think if they've got that draft motion, put it up, and I'll defer to you to figure out how to tidy this up for the council.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. So let's go ahead and put that up. And the motion is to submit the Black Sea Bass Commercial State Allocation Amendment to the National Marine Fisheries Service with the preferred alternatives as amended by the action today. Is there anyone from the council that wants to make that motion at this time?
Mike, I think there might be some perfection to that motion if you wouldn't mind, John Almeida.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think we had another version of this motion, Julia, that that was ready to go based on the email exchange we had with John. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Yeah, why don't you guys take a minute to get up there what it was that was perfected.
John, if you could just perfect that for Maya. It was at that point we were in the thick of, Maya was in the thick of moving things, so I didn't send her any changes.
Okay, Julia has it. If Julia can have I don't know if Julia can have control of the screen or just send it to Maya. That would be the easiest. Unless John, you just want to read it.
John could just read it. I think that'll be our fastest way.
Okay. What I had sent to Julia read, I move to submit the Black Sea Bass Commercial State Allocation Amendment to NMFS with the preferred alternatives approved at the December 16th, 2020 and February 1st, 2021 meetings as amended by the action today.
Can you just read the last part of that again, please?
With the preferred alternatives approved at the December 16th, 2020 and February 1st, 2021 meetings as amended by the action today.
Okay. John, can you see the screen? Or are you on your phone? Can you see?
Yep, I can see it.
Does that read as you intended to read?
Yeah, the intention here is to just, wrap things up in a bow here that,
Yeah, of course.
That what we voted on undoing earlier, we're now wrapping up and making clear that the alternatives are only amended as to the extent that we amended them with the vote that just finished.
That just happened. Okay. Yeah, and I think it's important for the council to understand that by supporting the work of the board, supporting the motion by the board and the council, those allocations in the federal FMP will stay the same based on state and federal FMPs. And so we're not going to be in a situation based on the motion, based on the vote that just happened, we're not going to be in a situation where we have different state and federal allocations to the states. So I think that's an important thing to just recognize as far as the action that just happened. So I'm comfortable with this. Do you want me to read it into the record and then call for a first and a second on this? Is that the best thing, John?
I think we need to move someone to make the motion.
Yeah. Why don't I? So everyone can see this on their screen. Does anyone want to make this motion? If so, can you please read it into the record? I can't see hands go up, so I'll ask Tony to call on members of the council that want to make this motion.
Joe Semino.
Go ahead, Joe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry. I move to submit the Black Sea Bass Commercial State Allocation Amendment with the preferred alternatives as approved at the December 16th, 2020 and February 1st, 2021 meetings as amended by the actions today.
Okay, so we have a motion made by Joe Semino, and I'm going to look for a second on behalf of the council. Does anyone want to second that on behalf of the council?
Maureen Davidson.
Okay, so we have Ms. Davidson. Thank you, Maureen. Any discussion on the motion? Is there any opposition to the motion? If anyone is opposed to the motion, can you please raise your hand?
I have Kate Wilkie with her hand up.
Kate, go ahead.
Yeah, Mike, thanks, Mr. Chair. This isn't opposition. I wanted to just make a comment before we vote on this and just say that I want to support Shanna Madson's earlier suggestion that the allocation issue be looked at by the allocation working group, because there were some questions about the policy board kind of weighing in on allocation on this issue. So, I felt a little hamstrung as a council member today because I think it's really important that the state allocations be a part of the federal FMP. So, it was just difficult voting today. And so I just wanted to say that on the record before we submit this to the service, but I am not opposing this option,
Okay.
this motion.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that, Kate. And, based on the discussion that Shanna brought up, that's something certainly that the board can take up to work with the executive. Bob, is that executive committee or is that policy board that is spearheading that allocation work group? Bob Beal, maybe if you're still on the call, or Tony.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. That would be the policy board.
Okay. So maybe that's something that can come up at a future meeting, maybe as an agenda item to talk about, how the allocation issues are being dealt with. I don't know, just something to follow up with. So, okay. Anyone else have any other comments on the motion before us as a council member? Tony, do you see any hands?
No additional hands.
Okay. Let me ask again, is there any opposition to the motion to submit the revised changes from today, the amended changes to the Black Sea Bass commercial state allocations? Is there any opposition to resubmitting that as we discussed today?
I see, excuse me, I see no hands in opposition.
Okay, so motion carries based on unanimous consent. Let me ask staff, is there anything else that we need to take up as a council at this point?
Mike Pitney has his hand up, Mr. Chair.
Yep, go ahead, Mike.
Just flagging an abstention.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, so motion carries unanimous consent with abstentions by Garfa.
And Mr. Chairman, we have nothing else.
That's it, Chris?
We have nothing else. Yep, that's it.
Okay. All right, back to you, Chairman Nowalski. We're good on our end on the council side. I'll let you go ahead and call the meeting adjourned. Thanks for your efforts today too. You did a great job.
Well, again, I appreciate everyone's indulgence and patience today. So to wrap up the board agenda at this point, the next agenda item that we had was FMP review and compliance reports. Staff has been working behind the scenes with the council this morning to have that added as a board-only agenda item for next week's meetings, when we will be meeting jointly as opposed to concurrently, but that would be a board-only action, as well as seeing if there's anything else that can be taken up. So that's going to address that issue. Under other business, again, we've heard the concerns raised by both a board and a council member here today about the process here. I'll offer that the policy board is meeting tomorrow. Again, I would offer anyone to bring that up under other business there, as well as this species board can continue to go ahead and look back at what we've done here and make any recommendations to the policy board moving forward at some point moving forward. Is there any other business that has to come before the board today? Okay, seeing no hands and hearing nothing else, and having completed the business before the board, the meeting stands adjourned. Thank you again to everybody, staff, and all board and council members and the public today. Thank you so much.